to do a couple of things today. One is, there's a lot of discouraging news. So I'm going to tell you some really good news that I bet most of you aren't aware of about what God is doing in our country. Pretty dramatic. And then the other thing I'm going to do, because I've been told at Toolbox, it's like kind of tell war stories and talk about God's principles, and maybe that could apply to everybody. And so I'm going to talk about some of the things that have been really, I think, key for me and that other people might be able to use in being successful in what they're doing. So that's kind of my purpose. So let me start with the basics. What's First Liberty? First Liberty is the largest legal organization in the country that all we do is religious freedom. So let's say you're a 5-year-old girl, your name is Gabriela Perez, and you're caught praying over your meal, and you're told it's not good to pray at school. And you're a poor family and you live outside of Orlando. I mean, what do? It's not like you can go hire a legal team because you have a lot of money in the bank. Well, we come in, we bring the best litigators in the country who donate their time so that when Gabriela wins her case, which we did win Gabriela's case, we don't just win for Gabriela, but we set a precedent for all of our kids and our grandkids. And so that's really the kind of basics. Well, why is this important? Is it important even if you're not a person of faith? Yes, it is. This is our first freedom, religious freedom. It's the first thing in the Constitution because our founders understood if you lose this freedom, you'll lose all your freedoms. And what I find is believers often don't get this. They say, I like religious freedom because I want to be able to exercise my faith. It's so much bigger than that. Every battle, and we're in a lot of battles right now, if you'll notice, if you'll pay attention, every attack on freedom, you'll find that the antidote is first a religious freedom fight. Under COVID, when all these mayors and governors got all this power, what was the first legal issue that was all over the country? It was synagogues and churches being shut down. You can go to Walmart and you can go anywhere else, but you can't go to a church for an hour on Sunday because that's where COVID is really dangerous, right? Okay, right now we have a huge case at the Supreme Court. The new attack is in the workplace in taking away people's freedoms. There's all these woke corporations, all these weird DEI committees and everything trying to force people to violate their faith. The antidote is religious freedom. And we have a huge case at the court that's going to be argued in April. I could go through example after example. And so the best way I can describe why this is such a fundamental freedom is that the one thing that a totalitarian regime can never allow, so whenever you see this oppression comes in, the one thing it can never allow are citizens who hold an allegiance to one higher than the government. So whenever that type of oppression comes in, you'll find that the first flashpoint is religious freedom. If you don't have the right to think, the right of conscience, if you don't have those rights, you won't have political freedoms, you won't have economic freedoms, you won't have any freedoms. And so that's the flashpoint. Well, that being the case, you're probably noticing that we're in a lot of these fights right now. We're fighting over these foundational freedoms. And I'm seeing attacks throughout in the marketplace. Schools, we just finished a case with they had face painting at school. But one kid was ordered to rub his face paint. Why? Because he had a cross on his face. Okay, well, that violates the First Amendment. We're about to argue a case here in a couple of months at the Federal Court of Appeals called Cambridge Christian School. 2 Christian schools in the state championship football game in the state of Florida. They banned them from having a prayer before their football game. Kid you not. Why? Well, because they were at the Citrus Bowl. Okay, explain more. Well, it's government microphones. Oh, well, I wasn't aware that if you say Jesus over a government microphone, there's a nuclear explosion. But this is what they believe. And so they literally banned. By the way, this Citrus Bowl is the same place Billy Graham held a revival 40 years ago. And now they're trying to tell 2 Christian schools that they can't have a prayer before their game. We're now having to argue at the Federal Court of Appeals. I feel very confident about our ability to win that case. One of my favorite parts of the case actually is the Florida Department of Education, under the governor there, has filed a brief on our side against the Florida High School Athletic Association saying they had every right to pray. So at least some people have a right mindset. But I mean, these are things we didn't used to have to fight, right? just before Christmas this year. And I could give you endless. We had 611, I think, cases last year. Awaken Church. This is outside of San Diego. There's a beautiful symphony hall called the Rady Shell. And they wanted a place where they could hold their Christmas pageants because they had so many people from all their campuses. And they went through a long negotiation and everything was worked out. And then at the very end, the symphony said, wait, you're a church? And they said, yeah, we're a church. They said, oh, we don't rent to churches or religious groups. We don't have any policies on that. And so the pastor called us and said, this doesn't seem right. I said, no, there's a bigger policy. It's called the United States Constitution, state law in California, federal law. And so we sent him a letter and we said, hey, you can either follow the law voluntarily or we can have a federal judge help you with that process. And they decided that they wanted to go the voluntary route. So this Christmas, they had 15,000 people at the Rady Shell. And the pastor sent me a text message saying so many people had come to know the Lord at that event that he couldn't even count the numbers. But we're having a fight over the ability of them to just be treated like everybody else, right? We've got a case, Chabad on the Beaches, a Jewish synagogue case outside of New York. A piece of property sat there for 2.5 years for sale. Nobody wanted it until the synagogue bought it. And as soon as they bought it, the city said, we're now going to take that over for eminent domain. What is the emergency that you're going to kick a house of worship out of its building? Well, we want to train our lifeguards in that building. Not exactly an emergency. So a federal judge has enjoined them from doing that. And now we're arguing at the Federal Court of Appeals here in the next few months. So again, just think about the idea that we're having a fight over these things. You can't even be a church or a synagogue, right? You can't even rent a facility like everybody else, or you have to fight. Now we're winning, but we're having a fight. In the workplace, just a flood of cases right now of people who maybe have been working someplace their whole lives. Thinking of Valerie Klosterman as one example. She'd been a physician's assistant for 20 years, perfect record. Big University of Michigan health system takes over this smaller health system. And all of a sudden she gets called into the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion office and she's told she needs to sign things about transgenderism that violate her faith. And she said, I can't sign this. Well, they proceed to call her evil and then fire her after 20 years. And this kind of stuff is happening across the country. I just finished Monday. Mark and I were at the Fifth Circuit in New Orleans. We had an argument in the big Navy SEALs case. So we have cases throughout the military, even stuff that's, chaplains having to be defended because a chaplain says something religious. Well, this is the Navy SEALs case, probably the most known sort of case in the military, or maybe one of the most known cases in the country. These are 35 Navy SEALs. 350 years of service to our country, many of them suffering for what they had given for our country. And when they came out with the vaccine mandate, many of them already had it, but these particular 35 each had different religious objections to taking the vaccine. So there's a federal law, and you ask for a religious accommodation. And they said, look, we'll do whatever, we'll wear masks, do whatever you want us to do. Instead of following the law and going through a process which they were supposed to go through, they decided that they would just ignore the law and begin punishing the SEALs. So one of them is on his way to his PTSD appointment. They call the doctor and say, don't see him. They take their medical insurance away from their children. They stop their pension. And this, by the way, this just isn't the SEALs. This is throughout the military, all branches. If they had their way, there'd be about 50,000 military families thrown out of the military. And these are some of our very best people. Why? I mean, complete nonsense. Now, when we got into court, we immediately proved that they were violating federal law. And by the way, if anybody wondered if the judge was right in agreeing with us after the evidence we presented, just recently the Inspector General report got leaked. And his report to the military is, what are you doing? You're directly violating federal law. So if you ask for an administrative exemption to the vaccine, you get one. If you ask for a medical one, you get one. But every religious request denied. Now, does it matter if you're on a ship, if you're there unvaccinated because it was an administrative reason versus a religious reason? No, it doesn't matter, but yet it did to them. And of course, now we know it's nonsense anyway. It really doesn't make any difference. Well, they're in the process of trying to throw all these people out. And so we were having to argue in front of the Fifth Circuit. And look, this is about more than just this issue or these SEALs. We've got an injunction right now protecting everybody in the Navy. There's another one that followed us, everybody in the Air Force, another one, everybody in the Marines. But this is about what they're doing to the military. I mean, the retention rates are falling through the floor. Because why would you join the military if they can abuse you after 15, maybe almost 20 years? They can take everything away from you, everything you've given to the country, because they decide to and don't want to follow the law. Who wants to join that? So it's very important that we get a decision that says you can't do this can't ever be done in the future, and we'll stop this from happening, and people know that they can serve with honor and not be treated this way as this administration has treated these great men. Now, we were just with some of them incognito, obviously, at the Fifth Circuit, and these are just great guys and great families, and what they've been going through is really bad. Now, some of you are saying, thanks for inviting me to hear the depressing Shackelford guy, at the lunch. So let me tell you the good news. The good news is we have a method of dealing with this. We've been doing it for, 25 years or so in a row, and it's working. And that is that if you were to look at a normal nonprofit, the way they do their legal work is they raise money, they hire as many attorneys with that money as they can, they put them in an office, and they fly them around the country, and they cover their issue, whatever that is. That's not our model. Our model is there's all these believers who went to law school because they wanted to stand for what was right. And 30 years later, they've done honorable work for the people they've represented, but they've never gotten to do a case for the kingdom, for their faith, for their country. And we go and sit down with them and we say, look, if we give you everything you need, are you willing to give your time? Are you willing to bring your firm on this case? I said, we'll have on our staff are top lawyers from Harvard, Chicago, all the best law schools. All they do is religious freedom. They'll team up with you. But will you bring yourself? Like if we're in Houston, we don't want some lawyers from some other place. We want Houston lawyers, right? We want a team. And as you might guess, a lot of these guys are like, man, I've been waiting 35 years. Sign me up. And you can imagine what happens when they get that first case. All their talent, all their gifts, all their training, everything they've ever learned for the first time in their life lined up with their faith. Never felt that before. And it's kind of unfair, but we now know we have them for the rest of their lives as one of our volunteer attorneys because they're going to do this again. And they give cover to the younger attorneys. They get a taste of what this is like. And so most of the major law firms in the country don't just donate their time with us. They'll fight each other over who gets to donate their time with us. And my original goal on that was to get bang for our buck. And sure enough, average case, every $100,000 we spend, we get about $600,000 donated. It's like a 6-to-1 leveraging of resources. But what I didn't count on was the win-loss ratio. And that is, if you watch these major nonprofits that are created on the legal sphere, they're created to deal with a problem, a major issue, something. They're fighting really something big. And you'll find that if they're really, really good, they might win 40% of their cases. 23 years in a row, every single year, we've won over 90% of our cases. And it's God's favor, but it's also His method. It's His body all over the country. We can deploy the most powerful teams in the country within 30 minutes. And everybody's begging to be on the team. You know? The sort of legal SEAL Team 6 all over the country. And the result is incredible, and we're seeing great results. And normally that's where I would stop tonight or today. But then something started to change. About 6 years ago, we were getting ready. We're a nonprofit, so we don't care who's president. We're going to push them to be pro-religious liberty. And we were preparing for a Hillary Clinton presidency. And this Trump guy won. And we're like, okay, we've got to reevaluate. And we started looking at everything. And the immediate thing we saw 130 judicial seats open for lifetime appointments, which is very unusual. And we really felt God pressing on us, you need to create the best vetting division in the country because there's going to be a lot of people coming onto the court. And so that's what we did. We wanted everything known about everybody. And I don't know if you've seen the result or understand the result. I could spend time going through it, but I won't. But this is the most incredible judicial appointment group that we've ever seen in the country. Most highly credentialed, most committed to the Constitution and originalism, brilliant, youngest. And I mean, I'm telling you, the people that were put on the court really takes us back to the Constitution in dramatic ways. And the result of that is now you're starting to see changes in decisions. Because instead of what they think they should do or what they think the country needs, they're saying, that's not really our job. Our job is, what does the Constitution say? What does the statute say? It's taking us back to our roots. And so we're seeing that in lots of ways, but the biggest example is what just happened this summer. All we do is religious freedoms cases. Well, there are 8,000 requests a year to the Supreme Court. They took 67 cases last year. If my goal, like, have those planning sessions where you go and you have these dreams, and let's say my goal was within the next 30 years, I want the court to take 2 of my cases. That would be a really stupid dream. Not going to happen, okay? It doesn't happen. Out of 8,000, you don't get 2 cases taken out of the 67. Well, we didn't have 2 cases. We had 2 wins at the Supreme Court within 6 days of each other. Both major religious liberty cases. Carson versus Makin. This is a case that said, the state of Maine for 100 years said, we don't have public schools in most of our school districts, so you can pick whatever school you want, private or public, and we'll let you apply your money there. Well, after about 100 years, they thought, let's make one change. You can't pick any school as a parent if the school teaches any classes on religion or any religious aspects. Well, we said, you can't do that. The parents have a right to pick what school, as long as they get the other stuff they need. That you can't discriminate against the religious schools. And sure enough, we won 6-3 at the Supreme Court, that from now on, in any state, in any county, in any city, where you have a school choice situation, which we might have in Texas, I mean, they're talking about that in the legislature, wherever you have one of these programs, you cannot exclude the Christian schools as a matter of constitutional law from now on. So it's a big victory. But even the bigger case is a case a lot of people's they've heard about, but they don't really know what it means, is the Coach Kennedy case. Okay, Coach Kennedy was a guy in the Marines for 20 years, got out, was, asked to consider being a coach. And he's like, I don't know about being a coach. And so he's not a real religious guy, but he said, I'm going to ask God if he wants me to do this. He flips on the TV at like 2 a.m. when he can't sleep. And this movie is starting called Facing the Giants, which is about Christians and coaching. And again, he's a Marine, right? He's not brilliant. He likes to bash his head against the wall. He'd be the first one to tell you this. And he's like, well, look, they're praying at the end of the game. That's what I'll do. So he makes a pledge to God. I'm so moved by the fact that you communicated to me in this way. He was really blown away by this. He said, so that's what I'm going to do. After every game, I'm going to a knee at the end of the game, and I'm thanking you for the privilege of coaching these young men. That's what he did for 7 years, until they came to him and said, hey, if you go to a knee again, we're going to fire you. So what did he do? Well, he's a Marine. He went to a knee, and they fired him. And for 7 years, we're in litigation. And all the way to the Supreme Court, and again, a lot of you probably are aware, we won. And everybody knows now, Coach is going back to being a coach this spring. This fall, he'll probably go to a knee in front of, 1,000 TV cameras. And that's what most people know. What they don't know is what happened in the opinion. And that is, in the opinion, there's a case called Lemon that was handed down 50 years ago. And we have an establishment clause that says, the founder said, we don't want there to be a nationally established church, because then it'll take away our freedom, because everybody will have to support that. Well, 50 years ago in the Lemon case, we had a Supreme Court, same Supreme Court that gave us Roe v. Wade, and they said, no, we think it means more than that. We think it means separation of church and state, that whenever the government is, you can't have religion there. Well, the government's everywhere, right? We think it means that if you're offended by religion, you can bring lawsuits. You can't bring lawsuits because you're offended. Only our whole lives have we seen lawsuits because you're offended by religion. So we've seen nativity scenes under attack, menorahs, Ten Commandments. I mean, if there's any sort of religious activity at a school, it's like the school's on fire, right? Why? Because any of this is in the Constitution? No, because of the Lemon case. It's been cited 7,000 times by cases in the last 50 years. So 3 years ago, we had a case at the Supreme Court, the Bladensburg Cross. This is a veterans memorial that was put up 100 years ago by mothers who lost their sons in World War I. And then the American Humanists came along and said, you can't have this cross on government property. And believe it or not, at the Court of Appeals, they said, yeah, let's tear it down. And we went to the Supreme Court, and we said, we were vetting all these judges, and we knew a lot about Kavanaugh. He'd actually donated his time with us as a young attorney. We knew where he was on religious freedom. We knew where Gorsuch was. We said, we might have 5 votes now to get rid of Lemon. So let's argue to get rid of Lemon, which is kind of the grand slam, kind of a crazy thing after 50 years and 7,000 citations. Well, the court ruled 7-2 in our favor, but more importantly, 5-4, they refused to follow Lemon. They didn't reverse it. They just refused to follow it. And so I sat on our staff and I said, this is the crack in the armor. I said, but we're going to have to spend the next 10 to 15 years dragging this into every other area of society so that we can stop the hostility to religion. The schools, I said, are going to be the toughest place because these are young kids. People are going to be sensitive about all this. And then we get the Coach Kennedy case. And so we're at the Supreme Court, and we're thinking on a strategy early on, and we're like, this case is really important. There has never been a case before this one on the rights of either teachers or coaches and their faith at school. This is going to affect millions and millions of teachers, coaches. So if we go for the get rid of Lemon, that's like going for the grand slam when we can win with a single. We could blow the case. So we didn't push the get rid of Lemon. So midway through the oral argument, out of nowhere, Kavanaugh and Gorsuch start saying, I think it's time we get rid of Lemon. And our eyes are like as big as silver dollars. We're like going, what? And we're like, but let's see what the opinion is. So I'm sitting with Coach Kennedy and the opinion's handed down. And he said, did I win? Did I win? And we're like, yes, we're reading. And we're like 4 pages in, and it says, Lemon is overruled. And we watched the dissent go crazy. And so 7,000 citations. The case they relied on all flipped. Everywhere that crosses were taken down, they go back up. Everywhere that 10 Commandments were down, they come out. Everything just changed. Everything. And I had one of our more aggressive attorneys, Hiram, some of you know Hiram, came bursting into my office. I need $20 million. I'm like, what? I need $20 million. He said, everything was just overturned. We've got to go into every community of all 7,000 of these citations. We got to reopen every one of these cases. I need lots of people on staff. And I'm like, no. What we're going to do is create this campaign called Restoring Faith in America. And we're going to educate people to take their own communities back. Because we don't even have to do anything at this point. We've won. It's just a matter of people going to their school board and saying, why aren't we having prayer? We can have prayer now, right? Okay? It's a matter of your son or your grandson after the football game inviting kids from both teams and the coaches and saying, why don't we pray? Nobody can stop them. And there's an endless amount of this now. Everybody has been trained for 50 years how to be careful and how to be not allow religion in public. You're living 50 years ago now, if that's your mindset. And most people are. So we got to change that. But the way I look at it for the body of Christ, it's like there was a castle where they were holding our children and our grandchildren, and God just dynamited a hole through the wall. And we're all standing at the hole going, wow, look at what a neat hole. We just got to go through the hole. It's all there. So what's happening right now, the best way I can describe it is every American alive has more religious freedom right now than they've ever had in their lifetime. And we're just at the beginning. This is just going to get more. I mean, we're arguing a case in April. I believe we're going to win that. It's going to expand religious freedom in the workplace. I mean, we're going to start seeing more and more of this as we return to what these laws really are, what the Constitution really says. I want to flip now to, I just thought of, what are the things, as this has all been happening, as we've been building First Liberty, the things that I've seen in my life that might help in whatever you're doing, principles as a believer. I think the number one, if I was advising somebody young or even not young, but live out of your gifts. We always want to know God's will. Well, the most particularized, specific expression of his will we will ever see is how he made us. Because we're all unique. What are your gifts? What are the things that people say, man, you're really good at that? And you go, no, that's easy. Well, it's easy because it's your gifts, right? What are those things? What you don't want to do is spend your life sort of spitting into the wind or walking upstream or, when God created you to fly. And, Mark mentioned, when I was young, I knew my gifts were in analytical thinking and speaking. And I thought, I either need to be a pastor or a lawyer. And people said, that's like a God or Satan choice, isn't it, to be a pastor or a lawyer? And I looked at my DNA and I thought, I'd probably do better at dispensing justice rather than mercy. So I'd probably make a better lawyer than I would a pastor. And, I just think of a number of years later, walking out of the Supreme Court, having argued my first case at the Supreme Court. And, you go down the steps, and there's a cache of microphones with the media all ready to talk. And my wife, as we started to walk down the steps, said, this is what you were born to do. And I thought I would have missed that if I would have listened to the, hey, you're not going to make a lot of money doing that. Or, hey, that's not, why did you did really well. Well, you should do this. I mean, you got to listen to how God created you. I think he blesses you much more if you just follow how he created you, right? It's Ephesians 2:10 that we are created to do good works that God has laid out in front of us for us to walk into. And so number one is live out of your gifts. But number two, what I think, especially in our culture, this cancel culture right now, is you're going to have to do it with courage. Because everywhere when you start to live out of those powerful gifts God's given you, you're going to start to have great impact for the kingdom. He's going to try to intimidate you. That's what the enemy does. And so you're going to have, especially now, right? When you think of all the way our culture is. And, lots of examples I could come up with this, but one of them is I remember when I told you about the judges. And this thing that we did with the judges is huge. I can't tell you how it's going to affect the future of our country. We felt God calling us to do this. But we were threatened because we were kind of stepping into other people's power source. We don't care about any of that, but people in D.C. do. Hey, we control all this, right? And they had a lot more money, a lot more power than we did, and people said they were going to destroy us. I had even had top people on my staff say, we can't do this, they're going to destroy us. But you know what we said? We said, God called us to do this. If he wants to destroy us, we're his. We'll do whatever he wants us to do. Turned out that he wanted us to do that. We knew he did, and it was incredible success. Great impact for the future of our country. We all are going to have those opportunities, and we're just going to have to if you want to have a real impact, you got to walk with courage and leave the results to the Lord. The third thing, and this might be more for young people, but it's just one of those things that kind of shocked me. Maybe it doesn't other people, but when I was just starting, I remember I just did the right thing because I felt like God wanted me to do the right thing. I didn't really think it would get you anything. It usually kind of disadvantages you, right? Don't cut the corners, do the right thing, even if nobody's watching, just do the right thing over and over again, over and over. What I didn't realize is 10 or 15 years later, it's like this wave of favor kind of comes washing in front of you. Doors start to open that you don't even ask to open. Relationships are formed that you don't even ask to form. There's just the reputation of a believer who's walking, scripturally, I think is so powerful. And we all make mistakes as long as we're willing to admit them and apologize. But I think there's something really powerful in this, especially if you're young, I would say, but for all of us, right? Just doing what's right and just being consistent with that. That trust, that relationship means a lot more than I think people realize. And one of the bigger ones to me is listening to God. I just don't think most people pay attention to what happens every day. Why did your plane get canceled? Why are you sitting next to that person? Why did God do this? He's probably got a plan. He's probably wondering if you're listening to what he's telling you to do, right? And I have so many of these. But what's great is after a while, if you start intentionally listening, you'll hear, you'll see, and it'll become much easier. And sometimes, he's real specific. Like, I'll tell you, this is just a great story of how God, and this doesn't happen if you're not talking to God, if you're not asking him things. But when we went national, we were a Texas group for years, and we went national like 14 years ago. And the first thing is I was like, gosh, I don't know how to build out a national fundraising division. So I had a consultant come, and I said, what do we do? He said, you need to find people who can represent you because you can't be everywhere. So you need to find a couple of people to be at different places. I said, well, what kind of person am I looking for? He said, somebody with the heart of a pastor and the courage of a used car salesman. And I said, I know people like that. And I had 3 guys that I thought were all going to be great, and at the last second, they all fell through. And so I'm on a plane from Dallas to Houston, never forget this. And when you're on a plane and you got your head down and your eyes closed, people don't know if you're sleeping or praying. Well, I was praying. I said, God, why did you give me these 3 people and then take them away? I'm just trying to execute your plan. And if I'm missing something, please tell me. And I opened my eyes, I kid you not, the guy to my left on the aisle, across the aisle in the end seat, who I'd never met in my life, when I opened my eyes, he tapped me on the shoulder. And I turned to this guy and he said, God wants you to know he's bringing you the people you need. And I'm sitting there just stunned, probably drooling. And he said, are you going through some sort of growth or reorganization plan? And I was like, yeah. And he said, God wants you to know it's going to be hectic, but it's going to come together. It's going to work really well, and then you're going to have a short time of rest. And, if we're not asking, we don't get answers. Now, sometimes he gives answers that way. A lot of times it's a gentle voice. But we got to be listening. We have to be listening. And I think we get so busy, we don't pay attention to listening what God's trying to tell us. And then the last thing, sort of point to get across is, I think one of the biggest lies we get sucked into is to think, well, I'm just one person. What difference can I make? And the reality, if we read our scripture, is that it's always the one person that God chooses to make a difference. We see it in our cases. One person stands up, and when they do, everybody comes behind them. But it takes the one person. And that's the way it works. And so I thought I want to show you, end with a video, and then we'll take questions and snide remarks and all that afterwards. But I want to show you a video. This is one of our clients, Gail Blair, who was slowly going blind. And she was like, God, what am I supposed to do? I mean, I used to minister to people as a nurse. Now I'm blind. I'm in an apartment across the street from the park. I mean, what am I supposed to do? And she's like, that's it. I'm across the street from the park. So every day, she walks out, and with her cane, she finds her way across the street. She makes it into the park, and she sits at a bench, hopes somebody comes near her. And if they do, she strikes up a conversation. She gives them a copy of the Gospel of John. And that's what she did until they banned her from the park for 2 years for talking about her faith. So here's Gail's story, and then I'll come back.
Nursing was it for me. It was my identity. I did everything. If I could help them get a job or an apartment, my husband says that I am a frustrated social worker. January 7th, 1984, I actually had been going to a Bible study on the book of John, and it opened my heart to the Word of God being the answer, the truth. It was the best day of my life. I actually was born with a genetic disorder, retinitis pigmentosa, and I still continued nursing until I couldn't anymore because of my vision loss. If somebody ever said to me, hey, you could have your eyesight, but you have to, get rid of Jesus, I'd say, no deal. Wherever I go, I try to hand this out to people. So it's 21 chapters of the gospel. I get around with my cane to cross the street, to go in the park. Going into a park to talk with people is a pleasure, first of all, but knowing that eternal life is real and people don't know that they're in danger. People have been saved in the park. I've had more of a reaction from the staff in the park that was not too nice, like they would interrupt me. There's plenty of people to talk to. I don't have to be going after anybody. I couldn't. It would be a tripping hazard for me. I was sitting on a bench with a man that I was conversing with. The executive director comes over and he says that he was going to call the police, and that's the start of the 2-year ban, even from the library, which that was a little bit of a surprise to me, that they would ban me from both the park and the library on passing out one of the 66 books of the Bible that you have in your library that people can check out. I guess my heart is broken, that I can't do what the Lord has told me to do. So if you want to say that I think about daily the lost souls. I think the Lord has positioned me right across from the park. It's a divine assignment that I absolutely need to fulfill. It's just a must.
So the update is, as you might guess, we won the case. Gail, every month or so, we get a note from Gail that somebody else has just come to the Lord at the park. She's so excited. And the guy who turned her in is now considering coming to her church. I just think, we really can buy into this. What can I do? We can, God's creating all this new freedom for us for a reason. We just need to be Gail. We need to be walking in where God's asking us to walk and make a difference. And if you have any problem, any pushback, any whatever, don't worry about that. You call us and we'll make sure you can do what God's calling you to do. But we've got to do our part. I'll mention, before we do Q&A, we'll have cards on the table. If you're not getting the information on all this, we would love for you to get it. We send out an email, for instance, every Friday on what's happening. You might not even know about some of these big Supreme Court cases. Or you could have listened to the Navy SEALs argument on Monday. We sent out a link so everybody could listen to the argument live. So it's a great way. And plus, we have a dinner here every year. We're having a dinner April the 22nd, and if we have your address, we can know how to invite you. So if you're not getting any of that, just on your way out, sign up on those cards, and we will never give your info to anybody. We don't do that. So we'd love to do that. But I'm happy to have questions and
thanks, Kelly, for being here. This is great.
Happy to be here.
You all got invited to this luncheon at some point. I got invited to First Liberty Gala about 5 years ago, and that's when I first met Kelly and Clark. And it's been awesome. And I remember sitting there going, I want to have what he's having. And you saw today what great things they're doing. And Kelly's a terrific guy, and this is special that he's here. So questions, anyone for Kelly?
You mentioned some of the challenges in business, particularly for business leaders who are faith-led. I'm just curious if you guys do work on boards for support for these leaders who are facing big headwinds.
Yeah, the question is working on businesses and including faith-led businesses and what work we do on that to help. We've got brochures on a lot of this stuff, number one. Like we've got one on, in particular, on faith-based businesses and what they can do, what the protections that are given them. For instance, Hobby Lobby went all the way to the Supreme Court because they're a faith-based business. They had the right and they were able to win that case. One of the keys was that they didn't come up with these positions of theirs in the middle of litigation, which wouldn't have worked so well. They already laid out who they were, right? They'd already said, here are our positions, here are our hills upon which we will die that come right out of our faith. Here are the scriptures. They had all that laid out. So there are things you can do. And it's kind of interesting because we just won these two big cases last summer. And now we've got two big cases at the Supreme Court. And we've been telling people the last few years, the battle now is moving out of the government and into the marketplace, is really where these attacks are coming. And the two cases we have are a case called Groff, which is about the rights of employees and their faith in the workplace. And the other is the Klein case, Sweet Cakes. And that's about the right of faith-based employers in the workplace and the right of them. And it's beautiful the way the law really works is you're allowed to be a person of faith and lead your business. And to even have those principles laid out. I mean, look at Interstate Batteries, Chick-fil-A, all these groups. I mean, they have God in their, mission statements, right? It's okay to do that as long as you provide religious freedom to your employees. And again, no Christian would ever want to say, if you don't come to my church, you're not going to get promoted. I mean, that's not a very Christian approach, so I don't see that problem. So it really is the perfect combination, religious freedom for employers, religious freedom for employees. And that's the battle. And again, I think this case that they took is going to be really important. It's called Groff versus DeJoy. Case won't look very sexy on its facts, but I believe we're about to overturn a 46-year-old precedent that has really stripped religious freedom of people as employees in the workplace. It's in the statute. It's something that we treasure as a country. If you have religious freedom, but they can take your paycheck, you don't have religious freedom. So this is where most people spend most of their waking hours is at work. And so you've got to have the ability to have religious freedom in the workplace. And this is going to be a really big case that if we win, and I believe we will, it's going to protect people at the very time you have all these woke corporations really beginning to crush people of faith if they won't bow their knee and sign things that they violate and all this. And so, again, I think we're at a good place, but a lot of this is up in the air. That's the area that's really up in the air right now is in the workplace. We know some of the things, but these sort of internal battles, LGBT versus religious freedom, all that, I think we're going to win those things. But I think that right now it creates fear and a lot of difficulty for people. So we've got, if you go to our website, which is firstliberty.org, you just spell it out, firstliberty.org, and put in the question area, kits. We have tons of kits, religious liberty protection kits for those in the military, religious liberty protection kits for parents and students, religious liberty protection kits for nonprofit organizations, for churches, because a lot of churches don't have their documents in order. They're not ready. So they might not even have a policy on facility use. So if they're in a little city that has a non-discrimination ordinance, now somebody says, hey, we want to get married, and it's 2 men or 2 women, and they don't have a policy on it. Now all of a sudden they're in all kinds of issues that they're dealing with, where if they just had a policy that laid out, it would help them. So there's lots of these kits that people, and one of the ones is faith-based businesses. So anyway, other questions? Yeah.
Kelly, I really appreciate you coming. It reinvigorates, I think, most people in this room. I've said for years, the majority has given the minority too much authority. That's our problem. So I really appreciate. What do you think we can do today, starting now, to really help you?
Yeah, I think you make a really important point. There's a great book, if you haven't read it, it's been out now a few years, called Live Not by Lies. And it helps you understand what's going on in our culture. But what it is, they went and interviewed all these people from these communist countries about how it came and what you do about it. And the answer, because this Marxist kind of stuff is coming at us in a lot of ways, and the answer was Live Not by Lies. Alexander Solzhenitsyn's last essay before he was banned from the Soviet Union was that, look, these totalitarian regimes only exist by forcing everybody to go along with the lies. If enough people, not a majority, just enough people will stand and speak the truth, some of them might suffer, but it collapses the system. And it tells the story of how this happened in all these different countries. And so that's really where we are. I mean, how many Americans don't know the difference between a girl and a boy? But how many people will stand up and say it? And this is what's going to be required. People are going to have to speak the truth. And we had my wife, came to me after reading this book, and I had read it first and gave it to her, and she said, we need to do a book review deal. And I'm like, Karen, I'm traveling, I'm never in town. The last thing I want is to take one of the few nights I'm in town and lead some book review. And she kind of looked at me and I said, okay, when do we start? And and so it was 11 chapters. We did 2 chapters a week for 6 weeks. We started with maybe 30 couples online. By the last week, we had 370 couples because they were all like, what do I do in this culture? And one of the questions that naturally came up is, gosh, if I speak against every falsehood or whatever, I'll be like on social media 24/7. And we're like, no, we're not saying you have to speak every time. But it says something if you're not speaking at all. Okay? And you need to let the Holy Spirit guide you as to when. And what was fun is to watch things happening as all these people began to speak into these things. And people began to bring the truth. And so I just think we all have different assignments, but we're going to have courage, and we've got to live not by lies. And we can get our country back if we're willing to do that. And, yeah.
As a Christian, a believer, is there any part of the woke culture that we should accept? It's all bad.
You know, most of it's bad. I mean, it depends on how you define it, right? If it's defined as, for instance, if wokeism was to say racism is bad, of course we'd agree. But it takes it and it perverts it, and it makes it to where you're supposed to be racist now. You're supposed to look at people based upon their race. So there's a lot of things that they take good principles and then they pervert them. But the big problem with wokeism is it really is a religion, but it's one of the worst religions of all because it doesn't allow any dissent. And I mean, it goes against everything we are in this country. That even as a Christian, you know, we come up to somebody and they believe everything the opposite of us. We say, God bless you, and we'll pray for them. We don't come and say, how dare you disagree with me? I want to destroy you. This is a really evil thing that wants to crush people that disagree with them. It shuts down debate, doesn't allow us to have the marketplace of ideas. I mean, and the whole point as a Christian with me is I love free speech because everybody gets their say, and I'll just let the truth win out. But you can't do that if they're shutting it down. And so wokeism ultimately, it really is just bullying. And it just requires courage to stand up to it. I'll tell you, there's a great example of this. In fact, it's a Texas example ultimately. Yale Law School was just like a lot of these places that were going so woke. And when people would come and speak, and they had student groups who would invite people who were a little more on the conservative side, they would literally not allow them to speak because they'd shout them down and do all this stuff. This is a law school. It's supposed to be about debate and opposite sides, and they weren't doing anything, not punishing anybody, not doing anything. Well, there was a federal judge, Jim Ho, on the Fifth Circuit, that gave a speech and said, this is unacceptable. He listed the issues and he said, from this day forward, until this is corrected, I will be accepting no law students that come out of Yale Law School as my clerks. And huge explosion that a federal judge would say this. Another federal judge came out, 12 others, not giving their names, said, we're going to do the same thing. It's only taken like 6 months, Yale has flipped it. I'm speaking at Yale in April, okay? But I do want to point this out. Jim Ho, Judge Ho, was criticized not only by people on the opposite side, but by people on his side for speaking out. So even our so-called friends will tell us, don't make a fuss. After all, Jesus and the apostles didn't make a fuss, did they? It doesn't need to be because of our manner. It needs to be because of our truth, our position. But yeah, I agree.
He's had his hand up long enough right here.
Yeah, I got a question about just thinking about taking on jobs that go against your faith. I mean, I think there was an example of a cupcake marriage. Like, I don't want to make cakes for, this gay couple. Like, how do you go about that, even if it was in other industries?
Yeah. No, we've literally have one of those cases right now. Sweet Cakes out of Oregon is sitting at the Supreme Court. This is Aaron and Melissa Klein, who started a bakery. They were going to pass it down to their children. And Melissa, they would sell their stuff to anybody, but they were asked every once in a while to do a custom wedding cake. And when she would do it with a biblical connection and do something special in the cake. And they had two women come and say, hey, we want you to do, a cake for our wedding. And she said, they said, look, we'll sell you anything, do anything, but we don't make a custom cake. That would violate our faith. And they said, but let us refer you to somebody who'll do a great job for you. And they did. The next thing they knew, the state of Oregon was coming after them. They were fined $135,000. They were ordered not to speak publicly their beliefs on marriage, because that might cause mental anguish to the plaintiffs. And anyway, we have gone all the way up to the Supreme Court. And, I think what you're going to see, there's another case at the court right now called 303 Creative, which is a web designer case where there's the same issue. You're about to see the court just on free speech, not even getting into religious liberty. My prediction is by June, you're going to see a decision from the court saying the government cannot force people to express or say things that they don't want to say. And it's just going to be a pure free speech. I think this is also a religious freedom violation. You can't force people to violate their conscience. And so the great news is the law supports you. The law supports you in the ability to do that. We've got 3 or 4 cases right now against CVS because they flipped their approach. They're now all pushing, because it's a lot of money, these abortion pills. And so it's caused them to flip their position, which was they have allowed pharmacists and people who can't prescribe abortion-causing drugs. Well, somebody else just does it. Well, I can't do it, but my cohort here will do it. Well, they're not allowing that anymore. We're getting all these people they're firing who are maybe, been there 20 years, 25 years, because they won't violate their faith. Well, there's no need for them to do that. This is incredible intolerance and violation, but the great news is the law protects them. The law would protect you as well. But I would say this to anybody, obviously, if there's ever a situation you know of somebody or you're in it and you feel like you're being put in that situation, call us. We'll walk you through what the law is and how to walk through that situation.
Kelly, before there's some other questions, but the Supreme Court's real important. All these decisions you're getting, is there a chance the court will ever get packed?
Well, they actually, one of the big goals this last 2 years was to pack the court, which there was a bill filed to add 4 justices to the Supreme Court, another bill to add 200 lower court judges because of all these good judges that got appointed that I was mentioning. What a lot of people don't know is packing the court is really destroying the country. If you look at other countries, Venezuela, Argentina, a lot of countries, you'll find that how did they go to, from freedom to totalitarianism? And you'll find that packing the court is a real common way. Because once you do this once, your court's over. The court is now no longer a judicial body, it's a political body, and whoever has power controls the court. So, for instance, in Venezuela, since they packed the court, there have been over 20,000 decisions involving the government, and the government has lost none. And so what people would think, oh, this sounds bad, it's political, it's so much worse if they look at history. This was tried in America in 1936 and 37 by Roosevelt. And when the people understood what was going on, and look, the president was a Democrat. The Democrats held 80 of the Senate seats. Okay, I mean, massive majorities. But they were averaging 1,500 letters a day into the Senate offices. And people said, this is tyranny. And not only the guy who was sponsoring this in the Senate died of a heart attack, they didn't get anywhere near to getting this through, and there was a bloodbath in the next election because America understood what this meant. So we were in real danger the last 2 years. We spent millions of dollars trying to educate people, and by God's grace, we stopped the attempt to do this. And right now we have divided government. This is only a danger when the president, the Senate, and the House are all the same party, because this is just a majority vote. You can pack the court. You don't have to change the Constitution. And so it's a real danger, but we've avoided it for now, and hopefully we can avoid it forever.
Got one more question, Carrie. Still got it?
How do you finance this enormous tax?
How do we finance? You think I planted him in the audience, right? How do we finance this? Thank you. We're a nonprofit. We're a 501c3, so we do what we do based upon the donations that come in. So last year, that was, I think, 25,000 people that gave about $26 million total. So, really a lot of people giving anywhere from $10 a month to $1 million a year. It just all adds in and allows us to represent people all over the country. And really, obviously I'm prejudiced, but I always feel like when you're investing, gosh, where can you invest and change the next 50 years? That might always be true, but it's so true now. God is doing something really unique in this arena. Stuff that I couldn't do. I've been fighting for 33 years doing this stuff, and stuff I didn't think possible, I'm all watching begin to happen. All the major precedents I thought would be with me until I was dead, we're taking them out. And we just took out Lemon. I think we're about to take out TWA versus Hardison in this new case. We've got the Smith case we need to take out. And when we do, we're just going to be restoring so much freedom that it's fun to be alive right now because there's a lot of darkness, but in this one place, there's light. And my image of what I'm watching happen is kind of like watching a Lord of the Rings, where you see darkness almost covering the earth, and then they almost pick the camera up and they start moving, and you get to a different part of the earth and you see this light. And when you see it, at the head is maybe Gandalf holding a white wand, and behind him is all white. But God's the one at the front holding the white. And so there's something happening here. Stuff I'd never seen before, it's all happening. And I think we're just at the beginning. So everybody who wants to jump on and be a part, I say, as you said, get a piece of the action. I'll just end with this story because I just love this story. I was with an elderly lady a number of years ago, and she came up to me afterwards, and she gave me a little envelope, and she said, I've got a lot of money. She said, and I've taken care of my kids, my grandkids, it's all taken care of. But she said, you know what this is? And it was a big annuity thing she was giving us. I said, no, ma'am, what is it? She said, I'm giving my grandkids a little piece of freedom. And I thought, that's a pretty good legacy. So thank y'all for having me. God bless you.